The laughter began before Miss Cressida Fell had fully stepped down from the hired cart. It passed through the stable yard of Halverton Abbey like a polite illness, soft at first, then sharper as more mouths caught it behind gloves and riding crops. Ladies in dark velvet habits turned their heads. Gentlemen in polished boots paused beside sleek hunters worth more than Fellbrook House had seen in ready money for years. Grooms looked down because servants were safer when they noticed nothing. At the center of it all stood Old Bracken, broad-backed, mud-brown, and entirely unimpressed, with a faded white star on his forehead and a small brass plow bell tied beneath his bridle. The bell gave one stubborn note when he shifted his weight. Cressida placed her gloved hand on his neck and felt the familiar warmth beneath his rough coat. "Steady, old boy," she murmured. "They're only people." Old Bracken flicked one ear as if people were among the least reliable creatures in creation. Halverton Abbey rose beyond them in pale stone and ancient certainty, its windows catching the thin Yorkshire morning light. Across the park, the private charitable riding exhibition had been marked with flags, low hedges, a water crossing, and a closing line near the oak rise. The event had been announced as a noble effort for tenant relief after a hard winter. Yet every carriage, bonnet, and whispered introduction made another purpose plain. It was also a stage upon which the county might admire rank, breeding, beauty, and money, preferably in that order. Cressida knew the order well because she had fallen through it. She was Miss Cressida Fell of Fellbrook House, a name that still sounded respectable when written on a card, though the roof leaked over the east passage and the dining room sideboard had pale spaces where silver had once stood. Her father had left debts folded inside ledgers. Her mother had left silence behind drawn curtains. What remained was a house too proud to collapse, a handful of tenants who still looked to her for decisions, and an old horse no dealer had ever considered worth taking. She had come because the promised subscription purse and Halverton patronage could keep 2 cottages from being surrendered to a creditor who had never met the families inside them. She had come because Old Bracken, whatever the yard saw, knew bad ground better than half the polished creatures brought for admiration. Still, the laughter cut. It always did. Lady Philippa Merrow stood near a tall bay mare whose coat shone like polished chestnut. Philippa wore lavender, daring enough to draw attention and pale enough to be called delicate. Her golden hair had been arranged beneath her hat with the kind of careful effort that society praised as natural. Beside her, Lady Agatha Merrow rested both hands upon a silver-headed cane and smiled with the calm cruelty of a woman who had never needed to raise her voice. "My dear Miss Fell," Lady Agatha said, allowing the words to carry only as far as they needed to wound. "How brave of you to bring a creature so experienced." Philippa lowered her lashes. "Mamma, don't tease. It's rather sweet, isn't it?" "In a rustic way." Cressida inclined her head with the exact degree of courtesy owed and no more. "Old Bracken has never objected to honest work, Lady Philippa. It has kept him sensible." A gentleman near the mounting block coughed into his glove. Someone else laughed. Cressida felt heat gather beneath her collar, but she did not permit it to reach her face. She adjusted the fall of her dark riding skirt, checked the reins, and kept one hand on Bracken's neck. The bell sounded again. It had once hung over the plough shed at Fellbrook, before the shed roof split and the newer horses were sold. When Cressida was a child, she had believed that bell called the fields awake. Now it called only memory, and memory, she had learned, could stand firmer than pride. A black carriage rolled beneath the stable arch. The yard altered at once. Backs straightened. Voices thinned. Even the horses seemed to sense that power had arrived dressed in dark wool and restraint. Sebastian Vane, Duke of Halverton, stepped down without haste. He was tall, dark-haired, and spare in his elegance, the kind of man who needed no ornament because every stone of the estate already spoke for him. His coat fit perfectly across his shoulders. His gloves were pale and spotless. His face was not cruel. That would have been easier. It was controlled, and control in a duke could make judgment feel like weather. Ladies brightened. Gentlemen bowed. Grooms became still. Lady Philippa's expression warmed as if a candle had been placed behind it. "Your Grace," she called. "Halverton is magnificent. You have made even charity look grand." "Charity often looks grandest when it is watched," he replied. The line was dry enough to win laughter, and it did. Then his gaze moved across the yard. It passed over shining hunters, plaited manes, liveried grooms, polished saddles, and finally stopped on Old Bracken. The laughter waiting in the yard seemed to lean forward. Sebastian's eyes lowered to the little brass bell. One dark brow lifted. "I had not realized," he said, clear enough for half the yard to hear, "that the charitable course would begin with a plough inspection." For a single second, no one moved. Then the laughter broke open. It was not coarse. That made it worse. It was refined laughter, acceptable laughter, laughter with pearl earrings and spotless gloves and glances that asked permission from rank before turning sharp. Lady Philippa turned aside as though trying to be kind and failing beautifully. Lady Agatha smiled into the head of her cane. A young gentleman murmured something about turnips, and another answered with a sound bright as cut glass. Cressida looked at the Duke. Not at his boots. Not at the gravel. At him. "Then your Grace may find the field more instructive than the yard," she said. The laughter thinned. A groom's hand froze upon a buckle. Philippa's smile cooled. Sebastian's face did not change, but his eye sharpened, and for the first time that morning Cressida felt herself seen by him. Not kindly. Not fairly. But directly enough to be dangerous. "You intend to ride him?" he asked. "I brought him for no other purpose. The marked circuit is nearly 6 miles, with water, hedges, and uneven ground. Old Bracken has known uneven ground longer than most of us have known drawing rooms." A flicker crossed his expression. Interest, perhaps. Or annoyance that a woman with a patched cuff had answered him without trembling. "Confidence is not always judgment, Miss Fell." "No," she said. "Nor is Polish." The silence that followed was smaller than the laughter had been, but much heavier. Cressida became aware of every watching face. A rich woman might have been called spirited. A protected woman might have been called amusing. A poor gentlewoman with a plough horse would be called insolent before luncheon. Sebastian held her gaze for another breath. "Then I hope your judgment proves equal to your courage." It was not an apology. It was not quite another insult. That uncertainty disturbed her more than either would have done. Philippa moved beside him with graceful ease. "I am certain Miss Fell will give us all something memorable." Her voice was sweet. Her eyes were not. "I shall try not to disappoint you," Cressida replied. "Oh, I don't think you could." The Duke turned toward the county stewards, and society exhaled. Conversation resumed. Horses stamped. The yard rearranged itself around rank and expectation. Cressida led Old Bracken toward the far side of the yard, where her saddle had been placed on a wooden stand. Her fingers remained steady because she required them to be steady. Inside, something hurt with the clean precision of a needle drawn through cloth. She had been laughed at before. For old gowns, for thin gloves, for remaining unmarried at 26, for managing Fellbrook herself as though necessity were an eccentricity. But this laughter had begun in a duke's voice. That made it official. That gave it permission. Old Bracken lowered his head and nudged her shoulder. The brass bell chimed once against his bridle. "I know," she whispered. "We have both survived worse opinions." She reached for the girth and drew it through her hands, checking by habit before mounting. Halfway along the leather, her thumb caught. Cressida stilled. The mark was narrow, almost elegant, placed where strain would deepen it with every movement. Not worn. Not cracked. Cat. For one moment, the stable yard seemed to vanish around that single dark line. Someone had wanted her mocked. Someone had also wanted her hurt. Cressida closed her fingers around the cut girth before the yard could see it. The leather lay against her glove like a secret with teeth, narrow and quiet and meant to do its work only after she trusted it. She did not gasp. She did not turn toward the Duke. Surprise was a costly indulgence for women whose misfortunes were already considered inconvenient. Instead, she folded the strap inward, as though checking the buckle, and placed her body between the saddle stand and the nearest curious eyes. Old Bracken breathed against her shoulder. The small brass bell beneath his bridle gave one low, muffled note, as if he too had felt the air change. "Not a word," she whispered. "You and I have never benefited from panic." A Halverton undergroom stood 3 paces away with a water bucket in his hands. He was a narrow boy, all elbows and anxious eyes, with boots that looked borrowed from an older brother. His gaze dropped to the leather and widened. "Miss Fell," he said. "Is summat wrong?" Cressida looked at him, then beyond him, where Lady Philippa Merrow's lavender skirts moved among the hunters like a ribbon laid across polished wood. Lady Agatha stood near the mounting block, speaking to 2 county ladies with her usual expression of gentle superiority. The Duke had turned toward the stewards and appeared occupied. Around them, the yard remained full of people who had laughed too recently to be trusted with the truth. "Nothing that cannot be mended," Cressida said. The boy swallowed. "That does not look like where." "No, then someone, not here." Her voice was soft, but it stopped him. If she cried sabotage in this yard, the accusation would not strike the guilty first. It would cling to her. They would say Miss Fell had arrived with an old horse, old tack, and a wounded pride sharp enough to invent danger. They would say the Duke had noticed her, and poor women had been known to mistake notice for opportunity. They would say many things because society rarely needed evidence when poverty offered a convenient shape for suspicion. Cressida slid the damaged strap beneath the folded saddle cloth and opened her small tack case. The spare girth inside was darker, older, and mended near one end, but she had oiled it herself 2 nights before by the kitchen lamp at Fellbrook. She ran her thumb along every inch. Sound. Worn, but sound. A familiar phrase, if anyone had ever cared to apply it fairly to her. Old Bracken waited, broad and patient, while she worked. He had always waited well. At Fellbrook, patience had become a household habit because there had been little else left in generous supply. The house stood almost 18 miles west, square and grey beneath the moor road, with ivy climbing over one cracked window and rain finding every weakness in the north roof. Once, its stable yard had held proper horses. Hunters for her father. A carriage pair for her mother. 2 quiet hacks for ladies' calls. Then her father died, and the ledgers opened like graves. Horses went first because horses ate even when pride did not. The silver followed. Then the second footman. Then the undermaid. Then carpets from rooms no one could afford to heat. By the time Cressida understood the full shape of ruin, Old Bracken was nearly all that remained in the stable. He stayed not because he was valuable, but because he was not valuable enough to sell. That was what the county would have said. They would not have remembered the winter he pulled firewood from the lower copse when the cart horse went lame. They would not have seen him carry sacks of meal across frozen lanes to tenants who had no flour left. They would never know that when the spring flood rose behind Fellbrook and a tenant child was stranded near the lower meadow, Bracken had stepped into water that tugged at his knees and carried both the boy and Cressida out inch by inch while the current pulled at his old legs. Her father had been dead 6 weeks then. Her mother had not yet learned to speak above a whisper. Cressida had been 17, frightened, grieving, and not nearly as brave as people later claimed. Old Bracken had not been brave either, perhaps. He had simply been steady. Steadiness had saved them. Afterward, Cressida had taken the brass bell from the broken ploughshed and tied it to his bridle. Bracken came to that sound from any field. To others, it was quaint. To her, it was home answering back. "There," she said when the spare girth was fastened. "That will hold." The undergroom looked unconvinced. "I can fetch Mr. Tallow, miss." "Not yet." But if that first strap had been used, it was not. It could have hurt you. She looked at him then, and his face reddened because he had spoken more feeling than rank permitted. "What is your name?" "Ned, miss." "Then, Ned, you have already done me one kindness by seeing what others did not. Do another and do not repeat it until I know who should hear it." His eyes darted toward the far side of the yard. There were people near the tack earlier. Cressida's hand paused on the buckle. "People? I cannot be certain." Fear returned to his voice. "I was carrying water. I only saw the edge of a cloak near the tack room door." "What color?" He hesitated too long. "Lavender, miss. But I do not say it were Lady Philippa. I don't know that." Cressida did not look across the yard. To look too quickly was to reveal too much. You are wise not to claim what you do not know. If I say wrong, I lose my place. And if you say nothing, someone else may lose more than a place. Ned lowered his head. The truth had frightened him. It frightened her too. Before she could ask another question, the soft tap of a cane sounded over the gravel. Lady Agatha Merrow approached with the ease of a woman who expected conversations to make room for her. Up close, she smelled faintly of violet water and cold powder. Her gaze passed over Old Bracken, the mended girth, the patched edge of Cressida's glove, and the plain travelling case at her feet. It missed nothing and forgave less. "My dear Miss Fell," Lady Agatha said, "I hope you are not troubled. One hates to see a young lady burdened by equipment as tired as her mount. Old Bracken is rarely tired before the work begins. How admirable! Loyalty to old things can be very touching." Lady Agatha's smile thinned. Though affection and judgment are not always companions. No. I have noticed judgment often travels without affection. Ned stared fixedly at the bucket. Lady Agatha's eyes cooled by a single degree. "You are spirited this morning. Only attentive. Attention can be uncomfortable when one's circumstances are already delicate." The words were mild. The meaning was not. Cressida felt the paper walls of Fellbrook tremble behind them. Lady Agatha knew more than she should. The mortgage. The creditor. The way reputation could be made to sound like mismanagement when spoken by the right mouth in the right drawing room. Cressida smoothed Old Bracken's manner. "Delicate things are not always weak, Lady Agatha. Sometimes they have simply been handled badly. Take care, Miss Fell. Society forgives poverty more readily when it is humble." Cressida met her gaze. "Then society must be frequently disappointed." For a moment, the yard noise seemed to draw back. Lady Agatha's smile remained, but the kindness drained from it. "I begin to understand why Fellbrook finds itself in difficulty." The blow landed exactly where it was aimed. Cressida thought of Mrs. Hargreaves in the Ash Lane cottage, of two little girls sharing one shawl last winter, of Mrs. Vale pretending not to notice when wages came late. She let the pain settle without letting it bow her head. "Fellbrook's difficulties have at least taught me not to confuse comfort with virtue." Lady Agatha's cane tapped once. From across the yard, Philippa called, "Mamma, Maribel is ready. You must come see how beautifully she takes the bit." Lady Agatha stepped back. "Do enjoy the course, Miss Fell. I hope your confidence proves less costly than it appears." She turned away, leaving violet scent and threat behind her. Ned released a breath. "You should not cross her, miss." "No," Cressida said. "But I have very little left that can be taken politely." It was not true, and they both knew it. Fellbrook remained. The tenants remained. Mrs. Vale remained. Old Bracken stood with his old bell and patient eyes, and all of them were vulnerable to a world that preferred polished lies to inconvenient women. A movement near the arch caught her attention. Sebastian Vane had turned from the stewards and was watching her. Not Philippa. Not the course. Her. His gaze dropped to the saddle, then to the spare girth she had just fastened. Cressida went still. The Duke crossed the yard without haste, but the space seemed to clear before him. Ned stepped back at once. Old Bracken lifted his head, and the brass bell chimed between them. Sebastian stopped before Cressida, his face no longer amused. "Was that girth cut before you arrived, Miss Fell?" he asked quietly, "or after?" The question was quiet enough to pass for courtesy, yet Cressida felt it turn every head within hearing. Sebastian Vane did not look toward the guests. He looked at the folded saddle-cloth beneath which she had hidden the damaged leather, and for the first time since his careless joke, there was no amusement in him at all. Cressida kept one hand on Old Bracken's neck. The old horse breathed steadily beneath her palm, a warmer truth than any offered in the yard. "That depends upon who is asking," she said. "The host responsible for every person who rides on my land." "Then the answer is that I do not yet know." His gaze lifted to hers. "You saw the cut before mounting?" "Yes." "And chose not to call attention to it?" "I chose not to throw a bleeding fact into a yard full of hungry people." Something passed through his expression, too quick to name. Approval would have offended her. Understanding would have unsettled her. This was neither. It was the first crack in his certainty. "Show me," he said. Cressida did not move. Ned, pale behind the water bucket, looked as though he wished to become a post. The nearest grooms had slowed. A lady with a feathered hat leaned toward another and whispered behind her hand. Even Lady Agatha had turned her head from Philippa's mare. "If I show you here," Cressida said, "the cut becomes my drama before it becomes anyone's danger. Then let it become mine." The answer came so swiftly that she almost believed he had not planned it. Sebastian turned to the nearest groom. "Fetch Mr. Tallow." The groom ran. "And no one touches Miss Fell's saddle until I say so." His voice did not rise, but it traveled. Authority did not need volume when it had been obeyed for generations. Cressida hated how quickly the yard quieted. She hated more that the quiet helped. Mr. Tallow arrived with the compact stride of a man who had spent 40 years around horses and fools and trusted the former more. His grey brows drew together when Sebastian handed him the cut girth. Tallow ran a thumb near the mark, then stopped before touching the cut itself. "Knife," he said. "One word. No drama. No politeness." A shiver moved through the listening yard. Lady Philippa's mare stamped, and Philippa soothed her with fingers too delicate to do useful work. Lady Agatha's cane settled against the gravel. "Your Grace," she said, "surely old leather may split without requiring a public alarm." "It may," Sebastian replied. This did not. Lady Agatha's smile remained. One does not wish a morning of charity to be darkened by suspicion. One does not wish a lady's neck risked for the comfort of conversation. The words struck the yard cleanly. Cressida felt them before she allowed herself to trust their direction. Lady Philippa's colour rose. No one would want Miss Fell in danger, of course. Then no one should object to a full inspection. Sebastian turned to Tallow. "Every saddle, girth, bridle, and buckle used on the marked circuit is to be examined. Quietly, but at once. Begin with those already placed in the yard. Then the tack room. No servant is to be dismissed from sight until spoken to." A murmur broke through the county guests. A gentleman protested that his daughter's mount had never been mishandled. A lady complained of delay. Sebastian looked at them, and the objections thinned. It should have satisfied Cressida to see the power that had laughed at her now used to protect her. It did not. Protection from a duke had weight. It could shelter or crush depending on how it was set down. "Your Grace," she said. "I have a sound spare girth. You will have Halverton tack. I did not ask for charity." His eyes returned to her. "Nor am I offering it. I am acknowledging responsibility for a danger discovered on my grounds." "A danger discovered in my hands," she said. "That distinction will matter to some. Then those people will learn to endure disappointment." For one dangerous moment, she wanted to smile. She did not. Smiling too soon was another form of surrender. Mr. Tallow inspected the spare girth and pronounced it sound, then offered one of Halverton's with the same matter-of-fact respect he might have given a duchess. That respect, not the leather, allowed Cressida to accept. "Thank you, Mr. Tallow. I will use yours for the first circuit and keep mine in reserve." Sebastian heard the phrasing. Not gratitude to him. Not dependence. An arrangement between horse people. His mouth tightened by the slightest measure, though whether from irritation or comprehension she could not tell. Ned edged closer while Tallow bent to check the buckle. "Miss," he whispered. "The cloak." Cressida did not look at him quickly. "Tell his Grace what you told me." Ned's face drained of colour. "I don't know enough." Sebastian turned. "Then tell me exactly that." The boy swallowed. "I saw lavender cloth near the tack room door earlier, Your Grace." "A cloak, maybe. I cannot swear who carried it." "Who wears lavender this morning?" a nearby gentleman murmured, and then wished he had not. Philippa's head lifted. The lavender of her habit, perfect and pale, seemed suddenly louder than any spoken accusation. "Many ladies own lavender, Your Grace," Lady Agatha said softly. "And many servants carry garments not their own. I would be cautious before encouraging stable gossip." Ned flinched at the word gossip. Sebastian noticed. So did Cressida. The boy has not accused anyone, Sebastian said. He has reported a color near a room where cut tack was later found. That is not gossip. That is memory. Ned stared at the gravel. Cressida saw his fingers loosen on the bucket. It was a small rescue, but small rescues were often the only kind available before courage learned to stand. The Duke's gaze moved once more over the yard, lingering on polished leather, fine cloth, bright faces made uneasy by the possibility that danger might belong to someone with a better name than Fell. For a breath, Sebastian was no longer the man who had mocked an old horse. He was a host confronted by a disorder his breeding had taught him to fear. Halverton had been raised upon composure. He had inherited more than land. He had inherited the lesson that a great house survived by appearing flawless, that cracks must be plastered before guests saw them, that what looked unfit often became expensive trouble. It was the lesson in his bones. Yet as he looked at Cressida, at her patched glove resting over Old Bracken's rough neck, he seemed to recognize that appearance had betrayed him before breakfast. "Miss Fell," he said, lower now. "Do you still intend to ride?" "Yes." With suspicion unsettled. "Suspicion is not settled by my absence." "And danger. Danger is not made safer by pretending it chose me by accident." Mr. Tallow gave a grunt that might have been approval. Sebastian's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in reluctant measurement. "You will ride the opening mark circuit only after Mr. Tallow has inspected the water, the lower bend, and the closing hedge." "That sounds very much like an order." "It is an estate condition applied to all riders." She looked past him. Several other saddles were already being inspected. A gentleman's groom held up a loosened buckle with alarm. Tallow's men moved efficiently down the line. It was, inconveniently, true. "Then I accept the condition. And if Old Bracken shows unease?" I listened to him. A faint echo of his earlier mockery shadowed his face. He looked at the horse then, not as a joke, but as an animal with judgment of its own. Old Bracken stared back with deep indifference. The brass bell swung beneath his bridle and chimed once. "Perhaps," Sebastian said, "I should do the same." Cressida did not answer because the yard had begun to watch them too closely. Mrs. Vale would have warned her that reputation could bruise from less than a duke's sustained attention. The stewards called the first ladies toward the marked circuit. Philippa mounted Maribel with the ease of someone born to be admired. Applause met her before she had done anything to earn it. Cressida waited while Ned held Old Bracken's head. "You'll be careful, miss?" he asked. "I have been careful all my life, Ned. It has not prevented people from calling it pride." "Then be proud too." The boy looked startled by his own boldness. Cressida's chest softened. "I shall consider it." She mounted side saddle, settling her weight with the old ease of necessity. The Halverton girth held firm. Old Bracken lifted his head, steady under her hands. Sebastian stood near the rail as the first riders entered the field. He watched the course, then the crowd, then Cressida, as if he had begun at last to understand that danger did not always shout before it struck. The opening stretch rolled green and damp ahead of her, broken by flags and low hedges, the water jump glinting under the pale sky. Philippa went first and drew admiration at once. Another lady followed. Then Cressida touched Old Bracken lightly with her heel. He stepped forward, unhurried, the bell marking each stride. Some laughter returned at the sound, but it was thinner now. They crossed the first grass line. Bracken's ears moved forward, then left. His back tightened beneath her. Cressida felt it before she saw anything wrong. Ahead, the water shimmered in its shallow trench, ordinary and harmless to the eye. The approach looked smooth. Too smooth. 3 strides from the takeoff, Old Bracken stopped dead. Not balking. Warning. The bell rang once into the sudden hush. Old Bracken did not move. The old horse stood before the water with all 4 hooves planted, his head lifted and his ears fixed upon the shallow glitter ahead as if the ditch had spoken in a language only he could hear. For one suspended moment, the field held its breath. Then the first laugh came from beyond the rope, small and delighted, and others followed it more carefully than before. "There it is," someone murmured. "The plough horse remembers his proper place." Cressida felt the words strike her back, but she kept her hands low. Old Bracken had not refused from fear. She knew fear in a horse. She had felt it in the tremble of a neck, in the sharpness of breath, in the desperate backward pull against the bit. This was not that. His body was still, but not panicked. He was waiting for her to notice what he had already found. "You see it, don't you?" she whispered. The bell under his bridle gave a faint sound as he shifted one hoof but did not step forward. The approach appeared smooth to anyone watching from the rail. Too smooth. The grass just before the takeoff was darker than the ground around it, pressed down in a way rain alone would not have made. A coarse marker at the left edge leaned by a few inches, as though nudged and set back carelessly. Beyond the water, the landing patch shone with a thin smear of mud under fresh grass, a lie dressed in green. Cressida's throat tightened. A fine horse urged at speed would trust the line. A proud rider would trust appearances. Old Bracken trusted neither. From the steward's stand came an uneasy call. "Miss Fell, will you proceed?" Lady Philippa, already beyond the next low hedge on Marybelle, turned in the saddle with a smile bright enough to travel. "Perhaps he prefers fields without puddles," she called. The crowd rewarded her. Cressida did not look at her. She looked at the water, the marker, the ground, and then at the wider left approach, ugly and longer by several yards, where the soil rose in a rougher bank and the landing would be less graceful but sound. It would cost time. It would look foolish. That, she thought, had become familiar country. "Left, then," she murmured. She opened one rein and asked. Old Bracken answered at once, stepping out of stillness as calmly as if he had been waiting for her permission to use sense. The laughter changed when she turned him away from the shining approach. It grew louder, then confused. "She is avoiding it altogether," a lady said. "No," a gentleman replied, amused. "She is composing an excuse." Sebastian Vane stood near the rail with Mr. Tallow beside him. Cressida did not look directly at the Duke, but she saw him in the corner of her eye, saw how he had leaned forward before he remembered to appear still. Let him watch, then. Let all of them watch. She guided Old Bracken into the wider line. The old horse lengthened into a practical trot, gathered himself without flourish, and crossed the water at the rougher bank. It was not a leap to make poets reach for ink. It was not elegant. His forelegs lifted, his broad body followed, and he landed squarely on the higher ground with the solidity of a creature that had pulled wagons through worse than a county exhibition. The bell rang clear when his hoofs met earth. A few people laughed again, but the sound was less certain. Cressida patted his neck once and continued toward the next marker. "Good," she said. No applause required. Old Bracken flicked an ear back, accepting this as no more than his due. Behind her, the next rider came on, a young lady on a glossy grey with a groom's polish in every buckle. She took the direct approach because it was the proper one, because speed had been admired all morning, because doubt did not flatter youth before spectators. Cressida heard the grey's stride quicken. Then came the abrupt scrape of hooves in mud, a startled cry from the crowd, and the thud of a horse recovering its feet after a bad landing. No one fell. No harm was done. Yet the laughter vanished so completely that the rush of water in the ditch seemed suddenly loud. Cressida turned just enough to see the grey sidestep, trembling, while its rider gathered herself pale and shaken. Mr. Tallow was already moving toward the water. Sebastian did not move at first. His gaze went from the churned landing to the leaning marker, then to Cressida and Old Bracken halfway along the field. The distance between them was filled with rain-bright grass and every wrong assumption he had made before breakfast. She saw the moment he understood. It did not soften his face. It sharpened it. Judgment, when corrected, could become something harder and more useful than sympathy. The rest of the opening circuit continued with a different sort of quiet. Philippa rode beautifully, of course. Marybelle skimmed the low hedge as if the air had been arranged for her pleasure. Her line through the lower bend drew admiration from the gentlemen and a murmur of envy from the ladies. Cressida rode without beauty. She took the wetter ground slowly, gave Old Bracken his head when his ears questioned a patch near the rail, and used no movement larger than necessary. Twice the crowd seemed ready to laugh, then remembered the water and held itself back. That restraint was almost more painful than laughter because it proved they had always been capable of silence. They had merely needed danger to make courtesy fashionable. At the final low hedge of the circuit, Old Bracken approached with his own idea of timing. He did not gather until the last practical moment. Cressida let him choose the stride. They rose, cleared the brush with a rustle of twigs against his fetlock, and landed with a small jolt that travelled through her hip into the saddle. Sound. Plain. Complete. The bell chimed once more as they passed the steward's marker. No one cheered. But no one mocked. That was not victory. It was merely the first inch of recovered ground. When the ladies reassembled near the rail, Philippa was declared first in style and time by the subscribing gentleman overseeing the exhibition. She received the announcement with a modest tilt of the head, though her eyes kept straying toward Sebastian. Cressida was named among those allowed to continue to the next marked circuit, not for speed, not for elegance, but because she had completed the course soundly and without fault. Lady Agatha's expression did not change, which told Cressida more than displeasure would have done. The older woman had expected laughter to be enough. Now she was recalculating. Mr. Tallow returned from the water with mud on his boots and anger in the set of his shoulders. He spoke first to Sebastian, then glanced at Cressida. The Duke beckoned her with a short inclination, formal enough for public view. She led Old Bracken over rather than remain mounted above the conversation. The marker was moved, Mr. Tallow said without greeting. Not far. Enough to draw the eye toward bad ground. The landing was tampered with as well. Grass laid over soft mud. By weather? Sebastian asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. By hand, Your Grace. Cressida kept her fingers on Old Bracken's reins. The bell rested quiet beneath his jaw. Then he was right to stop. Mr. Tallow looked at the horse, and respect crossed his weathered face. Miss. He was right. The word should not have warmed her so deeply. It was only a stable master admitting what an old horse knew. Yet after so much laughter, truth spoken plainly felt almost tender. Sebastian turned to her. You read it before the rest of us. No. He did. And you trusted him. I have had reason to. The Duke looked at Old Bracken again, differently now. Not as a curiosity. Not as a joke dressed in harness. As an animal that had seen what breeding had missed. So have I, it seems. The admission was small and public only to those close enough to hear, but Lady Philippa was one of them. Her smile held for a moment too long. Then she removed one glove with slow care and turned toward her maid, the narrow-faced woman with the black ribbon at her cap. A folded note passed from Philippa's bare hand into the maid's palm so smoothly that it might have been a handkerchief. The maid lowered her eyes and moved away from the rail toward the house offices and the side passage that led beyond the stables. Cressida saw the lavender edge of Philippa's sleeve fall back into place. Old Bracken stirred beside her, and the brass bell sounded once. This time, its note did not feel like memory. It felt like warning. By evening, Halverton Abbey had changed its costume. The stable yard, with its mud, bells, and inconvenient truths, had been swept from view, and the great dining room shone as if polish could make the day respectable again. Candles multiplied in gilt mirrors. Silver warmed beneath flame. Footmen moved with silent precision around dishes no tenant at Fellbrook would have imagined wasting, and every chair seemed placed by an invisible hand that understood rank more intimately than kindness. Cressida sat farther from the Duke than Lady Philippa did, farther from warmth, farther from importance, placed among two elderly cousins of uncertain title and a gentleman whose chief passion appeared to be drainage. It was not an insult that could be named. That was the art of it. Her gown was dark green silk, turned and altered from one her mother had worn before grief made colour seem indecent. The sleeves had been let out with darker panels. The hem had been brushed until it behaved by candlelight. Mrs. Vale had pressed it with such stern affection that Cressida had nearly wept before leaving her chamber. Now, beneath the eyes of women who recognized every sign of careful poverty, the gown felt both armor and confession. Lady Philippa glittered across the table in pale lavender, her fall in the afternoon apparently forgotten except when it served to draw a sympathetic glance. Lady Agatha watched the room as though arranging pieces on a board. Sebastian Vane sat at the head, composed, unreadable, master of a house whose walls had trained people to lower their voices before they entered. Once, Cressida imagined, he had learned the same lesson as a boy. Great houses must appear flawless. Disorder must be handled before guests saw the crack. Reputation must be preserved even when truth waited in the stable yard with mud on its hooves. She wondered if that was why he had laughed so easily at Old Bracken. A plough horse with a bell did not fit the picture. Neither did she. The first courses passed under conversation so smooth it seemed designed to leave no fingerprints. The county spoke of roads, weather, harvest failures, and the admirable generosity of Halverton's subscriptions. No one mentioned the cut girth. No one mentioned the altered water marker. That silence pressed harder than accusation. At last Lady Agatha lifted her glass and smiled toward Cressida with maternal concern sharpened to a needlepoint. "Miss Fell, I was telling Lady Dunmere that Fellbrook was once known for such handsome hospitality. Your late father kept a fine table, I believe." Cressida set down her fork. "When means allowed it, yes. How sad when old houses must learn economy in public. I always think the sale of family silver wounds a place more deeply than strangers understand." A lady near Philippa made the smallest sympathetic sound. The drainage gentleman looked into his soup as if hoping to find escape there. Cressida felt the room turn toward her, gently, hungrily. "Silver can be replaced when circumstances improve," she said. "People cannot." Lady Agatha's smile did not move. "How very practical." Though wonders wonder whether practicality, taken too far, can make a gentlewoman forget how she is viewed. Philippa's voice entered softly. "Mamma, Miss Fell has admirable purpose. Not every lady would ride before the county for a purse." There it was. Prize money laid on the table among crystal and fish knives. Cressida heard it land. She thought of Fellbrook's north roof, of the Ash Lane cottage where Mrs. Hargreaves had placed a basin beneath a leak and laughed so her daughters would not be frightened. She thought of Old Bracken standing in a strange stable while polished horses were spoken to as if breeding itself were virtue. "No," Cressida said. "Not every lady has reason to understand what a purse can mend." Philippa's lashes lifted. "I didn't mean to offend you." "Then you have been unfortunate twice today." A breath moved around the table. Lady Agatha's gaze sharpened. Sebastian's hand stilled beside his glass. Cressida knew she had stepped close to the line beyond which poverty became insolence. Yet retreat would have made the room believe Philippa's sweetness was truth. She would not help them build that lie. Lady Agatha tilted her head. "My dear Miss Fell, no one suggests need is shameful. Only that need, when displayed too openly, can invite misunderstanding. Need hidden too politely can become neglect," Cressida replied. "A leaking roof does not wait because society prefers not to hear it drip." The old cousin beside her made a tiny sound that might have been approval before disguising it as a cough. Sebastian looked down the table then. He had been quiet long enough for the cruelty to reveal its shape. His expression remained controlled, but something in his eyes had altered since the field. "Many families have sold silver, Lady Agatha," he said. "Fewer have kept honor polished while doing it." Lady Agatha's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. "Your Grace is generous." "No," he said. "Only observant." Philippa turned her smile toward him, wounded but pretty. "Surely honor is not in question. Then we shall take care not to dress it as one." The silence that followed was beautifully uncomfortable. Cressida did not look at him. She feared gratitude would be mistaken for dependence. She feared more that, if she looked, she might see sincerity and not know what to do with it. The footman served the next course. Conversation resumed with less ease. For several minutes, the room behaved. Yet Lady Agatha was not a woman who abandoned ground because one man had stepped onto it. She waited until the plates shifted again, then spoke lightly of estate management, creditors who listened to gossip, and the unfortunate speed with which confidence could leave a property if a household seemed unsteady. No name was spoken. Fellbrook filled the room anyway. Cressida's shoulders remained straight. The repaired seam at her left sleeve rubbed against her arm. She welcomed the discomfort. It kept her anchored. "Confidence," she said at last, "is useful. So is character. I have seen one survive without the other more often than society admits." Sebastian's gaze moved to her again, and this time she allowed herself one glance. He did not look proud of having defended her. That would have irritated her. He looked as though he had begun to understand that defense offered too late could not erase the wound that made it necessary. After dinner, the ladies withdrew to the drawing room, where firelight softened faces and sharpened whispers. Cressida stood near a side table with a cup of tea she did not intend to drink. Philippa sat at the pianoforte and allowed herself to be begged into a song. Her voice was sweet, controlled, and entirely without mercy. Lady Agatha moved from chair to chair, gathering sympathy as deftly as a seamstress gathering thread. Mrs. Vale was not present. Companions did not always cross thresholds where harm was most elegantly done. Cressida missed her with a sudden ache. A footman approached while Philippa's song filled the room. He bowed and offered a folded note on a salver. For Miss Fell. The wax was plain. The hand was unfamiliar. Cressida took it. No one seemed to watch, which meant everyone might have. She opened it beneath the shadow of a fern. The message was brief. Mr. Cale, acting for the current holder of Fellbrook's mortgage, had been informed of certain concerns regarding Miss Fell's public conduct at Halverton. He requested clarification before further indulgence could be considered. The paper did not tremble in her hand. She was proud of that, foolishly proud, because the words themselves had gone through her like cold water. Conduct. Indulgence. Concerns. Polite language for a door being prepared to close. Across the room, Lady Agatha did not look at her. That was how Cressida knew. Philippa's song ended to admiration. The applause sounded distant. Sebastian entered with the gentleman moments later, and the room brightened around him as if it had been waiting to breathe properly. His eyes found Cressida near the fern, then dropped to the note she had already folded. He crossed no farther than propriety allowed, but he came close enough to speak beneath the returning conversation. Has something happened? Cressida slid the note into her glove. Only confirmation. Of what? That some people consider a woman's reputation easier to cut than leather. His face changed, not dramatically, but with a stillness more dangerous than anger. Miss Fell. She lifted her chin. Do not ask to manage it, Your Grace. I was going to ask whether you would allow me to understand it. The answer was better than she expected and more painful for that reason. She looked toward Philippa, who smiled beneath the compliments of the room, then toward Lady Agatha, who spoke softly to a dowager with an expression of faultless concern. Understanding may not arrive in time, Cressida said. It rarely does for women who must remain polite while being ruined. The brass bell was far away in the stable, beyond candlelight, beyond music, beyond all the practiced grace of Halverton Abbey. Still, Cressida imagined she heard it once, small and clear, calling her back to something honest. Then Lady Agatha looked across the room and smiled. Morning came to Halverton Abbey with a pale sky and a colder kind of attention. News of the cut girth had travelled through the house faster than any carriage could have crossed the park, and by the time the ladies assembled for the second marked circuit of the charitable exhibition, curiosity stood at every rope line. The county had returned with rugs, umbrellas, and moral expressions, pretending concern while hoping to see something worth repeating. Cressida felt the difference the moment she led Old Bracken from the stable. Yesterday, the laughter had been careless. Today, it was measured. People no longer looked only at the old horse and his brass bell. They looked at her hands, her saddle, her plain dark habit, the patched edge of one glove. They looked as though poverty might leave stains that could be read if one were well bred enough. Mrs. Vale stood near the rail in a black bonnet, her face composed and her eyes anxious. Ned held Old Bracken's head while Mr. Tallow checked the Halverton girth and the bridle twice. The stable master's mouth was grim. Sound, miss. Thank you. Cressida ran her fingers beneath the bell strap. The knot was still hers. Left over right, loop twice, loose enough to ring. Old Bracken breathed against her sleeve. Across the yard, Lady Philippa sat side saddle on Marybelle, beautiful enough to make danger seem theatrical. The mare was bright-eyed, her bay neck shining under the groom's last brush, but Cressida saw the tightness near the jaw, the quick flare of the nostrils. Philippa laughed at something one of the gentlemen said and gathered the reins a shade too firmly. Lady Agatha watched from beside the steward's stand. Her grey silk cloak was drawn close against the morning air, and her expression held the patient sorrow of a woman prepared to be vindicated by someone else's disgrace. Sebastian Vane stood with the county steward's dark coat buttoned, face controlled. His gaze moved over the course, then to Mr. Tallow, then to Cressida. He did not smile. That was wise. Smiles had done enough damage. The first ladies entered the field at the steward's signal. This circuit was shorter than the first, but it ran closer to the crowd, passing the lower bend, a pair of trimmed hedges, and a flagged stretch before returning toward the stable yard. It was meant to entertain more than test. That made Cressida uneasy. Spectacle invited carelessness. Philippa rode third. Marybelle moved forward with quick, elegant energy, drawing admiration at once. The mare took the first hedge neatly, then lifted through the flagged stretch with a toss of her head. Philippa's seat remained graceful, but her hand shortened when they approached the lower bend. Cressida, waiting her turn at the side marker, felt Old Bracken grow still beneath her hand. Not alarmed. Attentive. A faint sharpness crossed the damp air, too slight for most people to notice, bitter under the smell of crushed grass and horse. Marybelle noticed. Her ears snapped back. Her stride broke. Philippa touched her crop lightly, more in irritation than cruelty, and the mare surged sideways near the bend. A cry rose. Philippa clutched the pommel, lost balance, and slid into the wet edge of the field, landing in mud rather than harm. Marybelle trotted several paces, trembling but uninjured, until a groom caught her bridle. The county erupted. Ladies stood. Gentlemen rushed forward then stopped, remembering propriety and mud. Philippa sat upright, shocked, her lavender habit stained dark along one side. "I'm not hurt," she called, though her voice trembled beautifully enough to make half the watching women pale with sympathy. Lady Agatha reached her daughter before the groom had fully steadied Marybelle. She knelt without lowering herself quite into the mud and took Philippa's hand. "My darling." Then her eyes lifted. Not to the mare. Not to the ground. To Cressida. The accusation had not yet been spoken, but the field heard it before words arrived. Cressida's stomach tightened. Old Bracken shifted, and the bell rang once, clear and lonely. Sebastian came down from the steward's stand, his stride controlled but swift. "Lady Philippa, are you injured?" "Only shaken, your grace." Philippa pressed a gloved hand to her heart. "Marybelle never behaved so." "Never." "Mr. Tallow," Sebastian said. "See to the mare." "At once." Mr. Tallow took Marybelle's bridle from the groom and ran a practiced hand down the mare's neck, speaking low. Cressida watched the horse, not the lady. Marybelle's nostrils quivered toward the ground near the bend, then away. It was not fear of the hedge. It was something scented, something placed where a horse with finer nerves would react before a rider understood. There was something near the turn, Cressida said. Lady Agatha rose slowly. "How very swift your explanation is, Miss Fell." The crowd quieted. Cressida felt the trap tighten. "I am speaking of the horse." "As am I. My daughter's mare was frightened, and now you offer knowledge before anyone asks for it." "Because I saw it." "Did you?" Lady Agatha's voice remained calm. "How remarkable. Yesterday your horse detected danger no one else saw. Today you detect the cause of my daughter's fall before the rest of us can catch our breath." Sebastian turned slightly. "Lady Agatha." "Your Grace, I ask only that this matter be examined. We have already had one unfortunate incident involving Miss Fell's tack. Now my daughter's horse is disturbed while Miss Fell waits conveniently nearby with an animal known to behave oddly." The words drifted over Old Bracken like smoke. Cressida put one hand on his neck before she could stop herself. That small act of defense did not go unnoticed. Philippa, now standing with the support of her maid, looked toward the old horse with wounded confusion. "I don't want to accuse anyone," she said. But there was such a strange smell when Marybelle turned. "I thought perhaps something had been brought from the stables." A groom hurried from the yard, face pale. Behind him came another servant holding a small linen pouch between two fingers. Ned trailed after them, horrified. The groom bowed to Sebastian. "Your Grace, this was found near the rear boards of the old horse's stall." Cressida felt the field narrow around her. The pouch was stained green-brown at the seam. Even from several feet away, the bitter scent reached her. Herbs. Sharp, irritating, unmistakable now that someone wanted it recognized. "That was not in his stall when I left," she said. The sentence sounded weak because truth often did when it arrived after arrangement. Lady Agatha closed her eyes briefly, as if pained by a duty she would rather avoid. "Miss Fell, this is becoming very grave." It became grave when someone cut leather. Or when someone feared she would not be allowed to continue by merit alone. The crowd shifted. It was a small movement, but Cressida heard it like a door closing. Yesterday, she had been poor and ridiculous. This morning, she was poor and dangerous. Sebastian held out his hand, and the groom placed the pouch in his palm. He did not open it. He looked at Mr. Tallow. "Take this. No one else touches it." "Yes, Your Grace." "Search no further without me present." Lady Agatha's brows lifted. "Surely you do not intend to delay the exhibition indefinitely." "I intend to prevent accusation from replacing inquiry. And in the meantime." Her gaze swept toward the guests. "Will my daughter be expected to ride again while the person most connected to these disturbances remains upon the field?" Cressida looked at Sebastian. For one breath, she believed he would refuse the shape of the trap. He had seen the cut. He had heard Ned. He had watched the water marker. He knew enough to doubt the story being handed to him. Yet she also saw the other lesson in him, older than this morning. Order first. Contain scandal. Keep the house from appearing cracked before witnesses. His jaw tightened. "The exhibition will pause," he said. "Miss Fell will not ride the next circuit while the matter is examined." Mrs. Vale made a small sound near the rail. Ned stared at the grass. Lady Philippa lowered her lashes. Lady Agatha did not smile, which was how Cressida knew she had won that round. Cressida stepped closer to Sebastian, enough that her voice could remain low and still reach him. "Do you need proof of my innocence, Your Grace?" she asked, "or only proof that I am poor enough to suspect?" Pain crossed his face, gone almost as soon as it came. "This is for order." "How convenient," she said. Order so often arrives just in time to stand on a woman's throat. The side drawing room smelled of lemon polish, damp wool, and judgment. It was a small room by Halverton standards, lined with pale paper, a marble fireplace, and portraits of vain ladies who seemed to look down upon every living woman with the same cool disappointment. Cressida stood near the window, still in her riding habit, with mud drying along the hem and Old Bracken's bell faintly audible somewhere beyond the glass whenever the stable-yard wind carried it. Mrs. Vale sat rigidly in a chair near the door, not because she wished to sit, but because propriety, once invoked, had to be endured like bad weather. Sebastian remained by the mantel, one hand resting against the stone, his dark coat marked with rain from the field and his face held in that severe composure which had become more dangerous to her than anger. "You should have left me on the field," Cressida said. "Before everyone. That is where I was accused." His jaw tightened. That is also where the crowd had ceased to think. Crowds rarely think. They follow permission. The words landed between them because both knew who had first given permission. Sebastian lowered his gaze for one moment. "I did not bring you here to silence you." "No. You brought me here so silence would look like care." Mrs. Vale's fingers tightened around her handkerchief, but she said nothing. A companion's silence could be a shield when speech would be used against the woman she loved. Sebastian looked at Cressida fully. Lady Philippa's fall changed the situation. "The pouch was found near your horse's stall. Until that is explained, any further riding would only deepen the spectacle. A spectacle is humiliation watched by people with clean gloves. And danger watched by people with none of the cost. Then you understand why I object to being locked away from my own defense." "You are not locked away." "No," she said, glancing toward the door. "Only managed into a room with good wallpaper." Pain crossed his face again, swift and controlled. It should not have affected her. It did. She was angry enough to hate him and tired enough to see that he was not enjoying the role he had chosen. That did not make the role less wrong. "I thought to prevent harm," he said. "You thought to prevent disorder." "Perhaps I did." His honesty made the air sharper. Cressida turned toward the window. Beyond it, the county still gathered in restless groups, waiting for an answer, a scandal, or a woman lowered enough to make luncheon more interesting. Old Bracken stood near the stable arch, his old head lifted while Ned hovered beside him. The sight steadied her and wounded her at once. "Your Grace," she said, "when a woman is poor enough, every protection offered by power comes with a cage hidden somewhere inside it." Sebastian did not answer at once. When he did, his voice was lower. "I do not want to be another cage." Then stop admiring the lock. The door opened before he could respond. A footman entered first, carrying a leather-bound ledger as though it were a tray of judgment. Lady Agatha Merrow followed, composed in grey silk, with Lady Philippa beside her in a fresh shawl over the mudded remnants of lavender. Philippa's face was pale, her eyes bright, her posture delicate enough to invite sympathy without preventing calculation. "Your Grace," Lady Agatha said, "forgive the intrusion, but matters have progressed." Sebastian straightened. "I did not summon you." "No, but truth is rarely improved by delay." Lady Agatha's gaze moved to Cressida with sorrow polished thin over satisfaction. "I would have spared Miss Fell this embarrassment if I could." "How generous," Cressida said. Philippa looked wounded. "Cressida, please. Mamma is only trying to help. None of us wants this to become worse. Then someone has been remarkably clumsy in preventing it." Lady Agatha accepted the ledger from the footman and opened it with deliberate care. This was brought from the farrier's accounts kept for the Northern Road. Abel Rusk's name is known to many households here. 3 days ago, there is an entry for pennyroyal, tansy, and stable salt sold to Miss C. Fell. Mrs. Vale rose halfway from her chair. "That is impossible." "Dear Mrs. Vale," Lady Agatha said, "I understand loyalty. But ink is less sentimental than friendship." Sebastian held out his hand. "Give it to me." Lady Agatha hesitated only long enough to make the surrender seem dignified. Sebastian took the ledger, read the page, and looked toward Cressida. She felt the room waiting for her to flinch. She did not. "May I see it?" she asked. Sebastian carried it to her rather than ordering the footman. That small choice did not erase the larger one, but she noticed it despite herself. Cressida looked at the page. The ink was dark, too dark. The paper had not yellowed where older accounts should have aged. The hand had tried to look rustic and careless, but it held itself too prettily, like a lady imitating a servant for amusement. Then she saw the signature. "C. Fell." Not the way she signed. Not even close. But the first stroke of the F curved like her father's had, a habit from old estate orders written before his hand began to shake. A strange calm entered her. Anger had a shape now. So did the lie. "Abel Rusk retired 3 years ago," she said. Philippa blinked. Lady Agatha's expression did not move. "Did he?" "Yes. His nephew Matthew shoes the North Road horses now." Abel's hand stiffened after a fever. "He no longer keeps accounts." Sebastian turned to the footman. "Fetch Mr. Tallow." The footman went at once. Cressida pointed to the page. "The ledger is too clean. The ink is too fresh. And that is not my signature." Lady Agatha smiled faintly. "Many people alter their hands under distress. I was not distressed 3 days ago. I was mending a roof estimate and arguing with Mrs. Vale about lamp oil." Mrs. Vale gave a firm nod. "She was, and she won." Unfortunately. The absurd little truth entered the room like a match flame in a cellar. It did not make anyone laugh, but it reminded Cressida that her life existed beyond accusation. Lady Philippa took a small step forward. "Why would anyone write your name if you didn't ask for the herbs? That is the first useful question you have asked." Philippa's lips parted. Lady Agatha's cane tapped once against the carpet. "Miss Fell, insolence will not improve your position. Nor will forged ink improve yours." The door opened, and Mr. Tallow entered with mud still on his boots and disapproval already on his face. Sebastian handed him the ledger. "Abel Rusk." Mr. Tallow snorted before he finished reading. "Retired, Your Grace. 3 years at least." Matthew Russ keeps the forge now. Abel could not write a full page if the king himself stood over him. Lady Agatha's face cooled. Stable gossip again. Stable memory, Tallow said. More reliable than drawing-room invention. Sebastian looked sharply at him, but not in rebuke. The stable master dipped his head, though he did not retract the words. Cressida closed the ledger. There is more in Old Bracken's stall. Lady Agatha lifted her brows. How convenient. No, Cressida said. Convenient is producing a false ledger before the ink has had time to look old. Philippa drew the shawl closer. You sound as if you expected evidence. I expected malice after the cut girth. I did not expect it to be so impatient. Sebastian stepped toward her. What do you believe is in the stall? I do not know. That is why I intend to look. I will have Tallow inspect it. No, the word was immediate, and it surprised even her with its force. Mrs. Vale stood fully now, her chin lifted. Cressida looked at Sebastian, not Lady Agatha, not Philippa, not the ledger. Old Bracken is mine. The bell is mine. The stall has been used to accuse me. I will see it with my own eyes. Sebastian hesitated. It was brief, but every person in the room saw it. In that moment, Cressida saw the conflict in him as clearly as if it had been written across the ledger. He wanted to protect. He wanted to control. He did not yet know how to do one without reaching for the other. Miss Fell, he said, if the stall has been tampered with, it may be better that I lead the inspection. Better for whom? He went still. For the inquiry. No. For the comfort of those watching you appear just. Lady Agatha gave a soft, shocked breath. Philippa stared as if Cressida had struck the carpet itself. Cressida did not lower her voice. I asked for a fair field, Your Grace. Not a prettier cage. The words changed him. Not outwardly enough for the Merrows to understand, but enough that Cressida saw his pride take the blow and refuse, at last, to hand it back as authority. He stepped aside from the path to the door. Then you shall have it. Lady Agatha's eyes narrowed. Your Grace, surely you will not permit Miss Fell to disturb possible evidence. I will permit Miss Fell to be present where evidence against her is being found. Sebastian looked at Cressida. I will follow unless forbidden. There was no mockery in it now. No command. Only a restraint that cost him something. Cressida took her gloves from the chair. Follow to see, she said. Not to lead. Agreed. Mrs. Vale came to her side. I am coming too. I hoped you would, Cressida said. They moved toward the door together. Behind them, Lady Agatha's silence felt more dangerous than protest. Philippa's perfume drifted faintly through the room, lavender beneath fear. Cressida passed the waiting footman, the false ledger, the polished hall, and the painted ancestors with their cold inherited eyes. Outside, beyond stone and glass, Old Bracken waited under the stable arch with the little brass bell at his throat and whatever truth had been hidden beneath his straw. The corridor from the side drawing-room to the stable-yard had never seemed so long. Cressida walked with Mrs. Vale beside her and Sebastian several paces behind, close enough to witness, far enough not to govern. Behind them, Lady Agatha and Philippa did not follow. That troubled Cressida more than pursuit would have done. Villains who stayed behind often believed the snare had already been laid. The air changed when she crossed from polished stone to yard gravel. Rain had begun again, fine and slanting, softening the outlines of carriages and turning the flags on the marked circuit into dull streaks of color. Guests watched from under hoods and umbrellas, hungry for signs. Cressida did not give them one. She went straight to Old Bracken's stall. Ned stood nearby, holding a broom as if it were the only object between him and ruin. Mr. Tallow was at the far end of the aisle speaking sharply to two grooms. Old Bracken lifted his head when Cressida entered, and the brass bell beneath his bridle gave a sound so wrong that she stopped before she reached him. It was the same bell. Same dent at the rim. Same dull shine where her thumb had polished the metal for years. But the note was flattened, caught against leather instead of ringing clear. Her breath drew in once. Mrs. Vale heard it. Sebastian did too. What is it? He asked. Not a command. Not yet. Cressida raised one hand without looking back. Light. A lantern appeared from somewhere behind her. Sebastian had taken it from a peg and held it high, close enough to help but not so close that his body entered the stall before hers. That restraint steadied her more than she wished to admit. No one touches anything, she said. Not straw, not bridle, not latch. You heard Miss Fell, Sebastian said. His voice travelled down the aisle. No hand enters that stall without her permission. Cressida stepped inside and placed her palm on Old Bracken's cheek. Easy. The old horse lowered his head at once. She lifted the bell strap with 2 fingers. The knot told the truth before any human could lie. It had been tied right over left, one careless loop pulled too tight, pressing the bell against the throat latch. Cressida always tied it left over right, then twice through, leaving the bell free enough to speak but safe enough not to trouble him. She had learned the habit at Fellbrook when her hands were still small and Old Bracken had been patient with childhood clumsiness. No groom here knew it. No stranger would have guessed it. Someone had removed the bell and replaced it in haste. It was taken off, she said. Mrs. Vale made a small sound behind her. Sebastian's voice came lower. You are certain? Cressida turned her head then. The lantern light cut across his face, showing strain he had not permitted the drawing room to see. Do not ask me for certainty if you mean to soften it afterward. I do not. Then yes. I am certain. She loosened the knot but did not correct it yet. Beneath the folded leather, where the strap met the ring, a dull green-brown dust had settled into the grain. It was barely visible, but the bitter scent rose when she held it near the lantern. Herbs. The same sharpness from the lower bend. The same weapon now tied to her horse's most innocent object. Her fingers went cold inside her gloves. Sebastian saw the change in her hand. He reached half an inch, then stopped before touching her. Instead, he brought the lantern closer. Tell me what you need. The sentence reached her more deeply than comfort would have. I need Mr. Tallow. I need Ned asked here without being frightened silent. I need the bell strap wrapped cleanly after I have shown it. And I need everyone to remember that this bell was not decoration. Sebastian turned at once. Mr. Tallow. The stable master came down the aisle, saw the strap, and swore under his breath in a way fit only for horses and betrayal. That were not tied so this morning. No, Cressida said. It was not. Ned hovered behind him, white-faced. Sebastian looked at the boy, then at Cressida, silently asking whether she wished to lead. She nodded once. Ned, she said, you saw lavender cloth near the tack room yesterday. Did you see anything this morning? The boy's eyes went at once to Sebastian, then to the floor. I don't want to say wrong, miss. Then say only what your eyes carried to you. He swallowed. Before dawn, I came to bring mash to the older horses. I saw Lady Philippa's maid by this stall. The one with the black ribbon. She said she lost a glove. His voice shook. But she were crouched by the rear boards, not near where a glove would fall. She had lavender cloth tucked over her arm. Maybe a cloak, maybe part of her lady's habit. I don't know. Sebastian's face hardened. Why did you not report it? Ned shrank as if the question itself had struck. Cressida's eyes flashed toward the Duke. Sebastian caught the mistake before she spoke. No. That was poorly asked. He stepped back, giving the boy room to breathe. What made you afraid to report it? Ned blinked at him. Lady Agatha's maid once said a boy without family ought to thank God for a place and not go seeing things above his station. Mrs. Vale closed her eyes. Mr. Tallow's jaw worked. Cressida felt anger move through her, old and fierce, not only for herself. This was how cruelty survived. It taught the smallest people to doubt the worth of their own sight. Sebastian went very still. You have a place here, he said. If you tell the truth, you remain under my protection. No servant under my roof will lose bread for refusing a lie. Ned looked as if he did not know whether to believe such a world could exist. Yes, your grace. Say it once more. I saw Lady Philippa's maid by Old Bracken's stall before dawn. Good. Sebastian turned to Mr. Tallow. "Mark that." Mr. Tallow nodded. Cressida bent toward the rear boards. Straw had been pushed back too neatly in one corner, as if someone had tried to restore disorder without understanding how an old horse kept his bedding. A small nail projected near the side board, harmless enough until the lantern caught the thread on it. Lavender silk. Half an inch at most. Cressida reached for it, then stopped. "Mr. Tallow, your handkerchief." He gave it at once. She used the linen to ease the thread free and held it in the lantern light. It trembled not because her hand shook, but because the stable air moved. Even so, it seemed alive with accusation. Sebastian looked from the thread to the bell strap, then to Old Bracken. His anger did not rise in noise. It settled colder. They used his bell. They used what they thought no one would respect. Cressida corrected the knot at last, left over right, twice through, loose enough to ring. The bell answered clearly, and the sound broke something in her chest she had been holding shut since morning. She looked down quickly, but not before Sebastian saw. He did not pretend not to. He did something more difficult. He did not intrude. "Miss Fell," he said, "I laugh because I did not understand." She kept one hand on the bell. Most cruelty begins there. Mine did. And when danger followed, I mistook control for protection. The stable seemed to narrow around the words. Ned stood silent. Mr. Tallow looked away with the dignity of a man granting privacy where no room existed for it. Mrs. Vale's face softened, though her eyes remained wary. Cressida turned. "An apology cannot untie every knot." "No, and I will not be grateful for being believed only after proof becomes impossible to ignore." "You should not be." His answer was immediate. That almost hurt more. He was learning too quickly for her anger to remain simple. "Then help without taking the reins," she said. "I will." A footman appeared at the stable entrance, breathless from the house and pale with importance. He bowed first to Sebastian, then to Cressida, because the day had already altered some small rule in him. "Your Grace." "Miss Fell." "Lady Agatha Merrow requests an answer by morning." Sebastian took the folded note and broke the seal. He read once. His face emptied of warmth. "She demands a public apology," he said. "From you. Before the county. If you refuse, she intends to let it be understood that silence confirms guilt." Mrs. Vale's hand found Cressida's arm. Ned stared at the bell as if the little object might defend them all. Cressida looked at Old Bracken, at the correctly tied knot, at the dust now wrapped in linen, at the lavender thread waiting like a sliver of truth. The bell rang once, clear and steady. She lifted her chin. "Then by morning," she said, "she had better be ready to hear my answer." By morning, Halverton Abbey had arranged itself to make cruelty look like order. The south terrace had been swept clean, the chairs set beneath awnings, the urns polished, and the little tables laid with chocolate, tea, and thin slices of bread as if a woman's honor could be weighed more comfortably when refreshments were near. Beyond the stone balustrade, the marked circuit waited under a grey sky, its flags dark with damp and its hedges trimmed into obedience. The county gathered in clusters, speaking softly enough to pretend restraint and loudly enough to be heard. Cressida stood beside Mrs. Vale near the end of the terrace, wearing the same dark riding habit because to appear in gentler clothes would have looked like retreat. Her gloves hid the folded note from Mr. Cale, the mortgage agent, and the paper pressed against her palm with every beat of her pulse. Below, in the stable yard, Old Bracken waited with Ned at his head. The brass bell had been tied correctly again, and whenever the old horse shifted, the clear sound rose through the morning like something honest refusing to be buried. Sebastian Vane stood several yards away with Mr. Tallow, his steward, and 2 county stewards who had overseen the subscriptions for the charitable exhibition. He had sent a groom to the Rusk Forge at dawn, riding hard for confirmation of the ledger's falsehood. Evidence was on the road, perhaps. But gossip was already on the terrace, and gossip never needed a horse. Lady Agatha Merrow understood that better than anyone. She appeared beneath the awning with Philippa beside her, the older woman in dove-grey silk, the younger wrapped in a pale shawl that made her look delicate and wronged without depriving her of beauty. Philippa moved with careful grace, neither too weak nor too strong, every step suggesting that she had been brave enough to rise after alarm and generous enough to forgive what she had not yet proven. Lady Agatha waited until the terrace noticed them. Then she turned toward Cressida with sorrow arranged like lace. "Miss Fell," she said, "we need not prolong what has already become painful." Cressida did not curtsy. She inclined her head. "Painful for whom, Lady Agatha?" A stir moved across the terrace. Lady Agatha's smile became more patient. "For everyone of feeling. My daughter has endured a fright. Your position has become difficult. His Grace's hospitality has been strained by circumstances no one wished to see. Circumstances are often more obedient when people stop arranging them." Philippa's eyes filled quickly, though no tear fell. "I don't want this to become cruel, Cressida. I truly don't. If there was a mistake, or a misplaced pouch, or something from your horse's stall that caused confusion, I would rather forget it. You are gracious to forgive me for a confession I have not made." Lady Agatha stepped closer. Her cane touched the terrace stones once. "You are clever, Miss Fell. That can be charming in small amounts. This morning, I advise plain sense. A few words will end the matter. You need only say you regret the confusion, that no harm was intended, and that you will withdraw from the remaining circuit to spare my daughter further distress." Cressida heard the trap click shut for everyone else. For her, it had been open since the note in the drawing room. "And in exchange?" Lady Agatha's brows lifted. "Exchange? Women like you do not ask without offering something that belongs to someone else." The terrace quieted more deeply. Sebastian moved one step, but Cressida did not look at him. Lady Agatha lowered her voice, though not so much that nearby listeners could miss its shape. "Creditors hear reputation faster than truth, Miss Fell. Houses already under strain benefit from peace. I would be sorry if Fellbrook suffered because pride made you careless before witnesses." Mrs. Vale's hand tightened around the handle of her reticule. Philippa looked down, her lashes throwing shadows on her cheeks. "Mamma only means that scandal makes everything harder. I'm sure Miss Fell understands that." Cressida did understand. She understood the roof over the East Passage, the tenants who had waited through winter without complaint, the creditor whose patience had been thin even before her name became breakfast entertainment. She understood that a false apology might buy time. She also understood what would be purchased with it. "You ask me to save Fellbrook by injuring the only thing it has not yet lost." Lady Agatha's expression sharpened. "I ask you to behave with prudence." "No. You ask me to lie prettily." Sebastian took another step. "Lady Agatha, that is enough." Cressida lifted one gloved hand, barely more than a motion against her skirt. "Let me stand." He stopped. The obedience was small. The meaning was not. She felt the terrace notice that too. Cressida faced Lady Agatha, then Philippa, then the watching guests who had mistaken silence for evidence all morning. "I will not apologize for herbs I did not buy. I will not confess to frightening a mare I did not touch. I will not withdraw quietly so Lady Philippa may appear merciful for forgiving what her household has helped invent." Philippa's mouth parted. "That's a cruel accusation. No crueler than calling poverty motive and dignity insolence." Lady Agatha's cane struck the stone harder this time. "Take care, Miss Fell. You stand very near ruin. I have stood near it long enough to know its face. It does not frighten me as much as becoming useful to a lie." A murmur spread among the guests, less certain now. Not belief. Not yet. But unease had entered them, and unease could make room where pity never did. Lady Agatha's voice softened dangerously. "Think of your tenants." The blow found its mark. Cressida felt it under her ribs, sharp and private. She thought of Mrs. Hargreaves and the Bell sisters. She thought of winter smoke rising thin from cottages that trusted her name because little else stood between them and dispossession. She held the pain until it became steadiness. "I am thinking of them," she said. "That is why I cannot teach the county that a desperate woman may be made to say anything if the right people threaten her roof." The old cousin from dinner gave a startled little cough behind her fan. A gentleman looked away. Philippa's cheeks flushed. Sebastian's face had gone still, but his eyes did not leave Cressida. This time, he did not come forward to rescue the sentence from her. He let it stand. A sound came from the drive below. Hooves on wet gravel. Fast. Heads turned. A Halverton groom rode into the yard, his coat dark with mist, his horse breathing hard but steady. He swung down and handed a folded paper to the steward, who carried it up to Sebastian without delay. Lady Agatha's face did not change, but her fingers tightened over the head of her cane. Sebastian broke the seal. The terrace held its breath with such eagerness that Cressida nearly despised them all. He read once, then again. When he looked up, his gaze went first to Cressida. Matthew Rusk confirms that Abel Rusk has not kept working accounts for 3 years, he said. He further confirms that no pennyroyal, tansy, stable salts, or similar herbs were sold to Miss Fell by the Rusk forge. Not this week. Not under any account. The words moved through the terrace like a crack running across ice. Philippa went pale beneath her careful colour. Lady Agatha recovered first. How fortunate that one paper arrives to answer another. Yet a forge account cannot explain why the pouch was found near Miss Fell's horse. No, Sebastian said. It explains only that the ledger you produced was false. I produced what was brought to me. Then we shall learn who brought it. His voice was calm enough to make the promise colder. Lady Agatha turned to the stewards with a grave expression. Until every matter is resolved, surely Miss Fell cannot be permitted to ride. My daughter has been frightened. The county has been unsettled. Prudence demands an end to this unfortunate display. One of the subscribing gentlemen shifted. Your Grace, the subscriptions were pledged upon completion of the exhibition. If the last circuit is abandoned, some may argue the result cannot be properly declared. Another, older and more cautious, added, the charitable object would suffer, and that would be regrettable. Yet no lady should be placed in further danger. The decision came toward Cressida from all directions, dressed as concern, framed as practicality, sharpened by reputation. If she refused to ride, Lady Agatha would call it shame. If she rode and failed, they would call it proof. If she rode and danger waited, Old Bracken would bear the risk with her. Sebastian looked at her. Not commanding. Not shielding. Waiting. That, more than any defense, gave her the space to hear her own answer. Cressida looked down toward the stable yard. Old Bracken stood plain and patient below the terrace, mud-brown among polished horses, his bell lifting a clear note when he raised his head toward her. She drew the mortgage note from her glove, folded it smaller, and closed it in her fist until the paper disappeared. Then she turned back to the county. Let the last circuit proceed, she said. I have been judged standing still long enough. Rain began before the last circuit was called, first as a soft mist over the flags, then as a steadier fall that darkened the grass and made every polished saddle seem less certain of itself. Halverton Abbey blurred behind the weather, pale stone and tall windows watching the field as if the house itself had grown uneasy. The county remained under awnings and carriage hoods because no one wished to miss the ending of a scandal disguised as charity. Cressida stood beneath the stable arch with Old Bracken at her side while Ned checked the girth with careful fingers and a face too young for the fear he was trying to hide. The old horse seemed indifferent to danger, admiration, and weather alike. Rain gathered along his rough mane and slid down his broad neck. The brass bell beneath his bridle rang whenever he shifted, clear now that the knot had been tied properly again. Cressida ran one gloved finger beneath the strap and felt the small space that allowed the bell to move freely. That little gap mattered. Trust often did. Mrs. Vale stood near the arch in her black shawl, watching the field with the stern despair of someone who wanted to forbid courage and knew she had no right. Across the yard, Lady Philippa sat beneath a canopy while a groom adjusted Marybelle's bridle. Philippa wore a fresh riding habit of deep blue, sober enough to suggest injury, fine enough to remind everyone of rank. Lady Agatha spoke with one of the subscribing gentlemen, her expression grave, her cane resting lightly against her gloved hand. She looked less defeated by the Rusk statement than Cressida would have liked. That was the danger of women like Lady Agatha. They did not need a lie to remain whole. They only needed time enough to make truth appear impolite. Sebastian came from the field with Mr. Tallow beside him. His boots were marked with mud, his dark coat damp at the shoulders, and one glove stained from examining the lower ground near the oak rise. He had been over the last stretch himself. Cressida had seen him from the terrace, walking the course not as a duke displaying concern, but as a man trying to measure every hidden weakness that power had failed to prevent. He stopped before her at a distance proper enough for Mrs. Vale and near enough that his voice need not carry. "Miss Fell." "Your Grace." Old Bracken lifted his head and breathed toward him. Sebastian accepted this judgment with unusual humility. The rusk paper has weakened the accusation, but it has not ended it. "I know. Lady Agatha will say forged ink proves nothing about the pouch. She already has. And if anything happens upon the last circuit, she will turn it before the mud has settled." "Yes." He looked toward the field. Rain bent the grass near the lower turn. The closing hedge beneath the oak rise waited dark and still beyond it. "Withdraw." The word came too quickly, too bare, and the hurt it caused showed in her face before she could lock it away. Sebastian saw it and closed his eyes for half a breath. "No. That was badly done." Cressida's voice stayed level. "It was clearly done." "Then let me say it as I should have. Please withdraw." No, Mrs. Vale made a faint movement, but did not speak. Ned lowered his eyes to the girth as though the leather had suddenly become fascinating. Sebastian drew in a slow breath. "Cressida." Her name in his voice changed the shape of the air between them. It was improper enough to matter and restrained enough to pass beneath scandal, with Mrs. Vale standing close and the stable yard in full view. Still, it reached her more deeply than she wanted. "Your Grace," she said, and the formality was both correction and shield. "Do not make concern another command." "I am trying not to." "Then why ask me for what you know I cannot give?" His gaze moved over her face, then away, as if the answer cost more when looking directly at her. "Because if you ride and are harmed after I laughed at danger, doubted your place, and mistook control for protection, I shall bear a guilt I do not know how to repair." The words landed without grandeur. That made them harder to dismiss. A proud apology could be refused. This was not proud. It was simply a man admitting that rank had not kept him from cowardice of another kind. Cressida looked beyond him to the field, where rain blurred the flags into dull streaks. "You would bear guilt," she said. "I would bear consequence." "I know." "Do you?" He looked back then. "I am learning." The answer was quiet. It did not ask to be rewarded. That was why it touched her. She tightened her hand around the reins. "If I withdraw now, Lady Agatha will not say you protected me from danger. She will say you protected me from proof. Philippa will become merciful by forgiving me without ever naming what she did. Mr. Cale will hear that Fellbrook's mistress left under a cloud. By next week, my tenants will have to live under gossip I purchased with silence." Sebastian's jaw set. "And if you ride? Then they will have to judge me while I am moving forward. That is not safety. No. It is choice." Old Bracken shifted, and the bell rang between them. Sebastian looked at the old horse for a moment, then at the strap beneath his bridle. "I wanted to keep you from being used. By removing me from the only place where I could answer." "Yes," he said. "That was my mistake." Cressida had not expected the admission to be so plain. It left her with less anger to stand behind. "I do not need you to be unafraid." "What do you need?" This time he asked before arranging the answer. She heard the difference. "I need a fair field. I need Mr. Tallow watching the closing hedge. I need the men near the lower bend to look at the ground and not at Lady Agatha's face. I need Ned protected if he is asked to speak. I need Mrs. Vale where she can see that I am not managed into silence. And I need you to remember, when the room turns clever again, that truth often sounds less polished than a lie." Sebastian listened without interrupting. Then he turned to the steward who waited at the edge of the arch, Mr. Tallow at the closing hedge. "Two stable men near the lower bend. The farrier by the rail where he can see every horse come through. Mrs. Vale will have a chair with clear view of the last stretch. Ned remains with Miss Fell until she mounts, then stands with my head groom. No servant under this roof loses bread for truth." The steward bowed and went at once. Ned looked at Sebastian as if the world had shifted under his boots. Mrs. Vale's eyes brightened, though she hid it by adjusting her shawl. Cressida kept her face composed, but something in her chest loosened. That was not withdrawal, she said. No, nor command. No, a faint, tired smile almost reached his mouth. I am a slow pupil, but not, I hope, an incurable one. That remains to be seen. Naturally. He reached into the pocket of his coat and drew out the bell strap, the spare one Mr. Tallow had used for comparison after the evidence was wrapped. Cressida had not known he carried it. The knot had been tied left over right, twice through, secure but loose enough to ring. He held it out on his palm. I asked Mr. Tallow to show me the correct knot. Then I untied it and learned it again. She stared at the strap. It was such a small thing. Too small for the way it struck her. He had not sent money, had not declared power, had not dressed help in grandeur. He had learned the language of an old bell because it mattered to her. Why? She asked. Because I mocked what I had not taken the trouble to understand. A knot is a modest education. It was overdue. She took the strap. Their gloves touched for one brief, contained instant. Nothing improper passed between them. Only attention. Only restraint. Only the alarming knowledge that he had begun to see her not as a problem to manage, but as a woman whose smallest habits had meaning. She tied the strap beneath Old Bracken's bridle, though his own bell already hung true. The spare would remain with Ned, proof that truth could be learned and held. Across the yard, Philippa mounted Maribel with graceful assistance. As she gathered her reins, her gaze flicked toward the closing hedge beneath the oak rise. The look was fast, almost nothing. Cressida saw it because she had spent years learning what people hoped no one would notice. Sebastian saw it too. His expression changed. What did you see? He asked. A woman who expects the day to end before that hedge. He turned toward the field and lifted one hand. Mr. Tallow, already walking toward the oak rise, stopped, saw the signal, and continued with sharper purpose. The steward called for the remaining ladies to assemble. Ned cupped his hands for Cressida. Mrs. Vale stepped forward and pressed Cressida's fingers once, hard, then released them before the gesture could become weakness. Ride as yourself, she said. I have no other horse, Cressida replied, and mounted side saddle. Old Bracken gathered beneath her, steady as a remembered road. Rain touched her cheeks. The county watched. Suspicion waited under every awning. Sebastian stood beside the arch, no longer between her and the field, but beside the path she had chosen. Ride if you choose, he said. Stop if you choose. But do not think you stand alone. Cressida looked down at him once. Then do not stand in front of me. Never again, if I can help it. She touched Old Bracken lightly with her heel. The old horse stepped into the rain, the bell ringing clear with each unhurried stride. Ahead, Philippa smiled as though the field still belonged to her. Cressida lowered her hands and whispered, "Let us disappoint them carefully." The county steward lifted his hand beneath the grey morning, and the last circuit began under rain that made every colour look truer and less kind. Lady Philippa rode first, because beauty and expectation still knew how to step before justice. Maribel sprang forward with the quick brilliance that had drawn admiration from the first hour, her bay coat darkened by weather, her neck arched, her ears flicking beneath the pressure of Philippa's hands. The watching county leaned forward under awnings and carriage roofs. They wanted proof. They wanted spectacle. They wanted the comfort of seeing rank restored to its proper shine after a morning of uncomfortable facts. Cressida waited at the starting mark with Old Bracken breathing beneath her, broad and steady as an old gatepost in rain. The bell at his bridle chimed once when he shifted his weight. Ned stepped back, his face pale with hope and fear. Mrs. Vale stood near the rail where Sebastian had placed her, one hand pressed to the shawl at her throat. Sebastian remained by the stable arch only until the first rider crossed the lower stretch. Then he moved toward the course edge with Mr. Tallow already stationed near the oak rise, not in front of Cressida, not behind her, but where his promise could become useful if the truth was threatened again. The steward's hand lowered. Old Bracken stepped forward. There was no leap of glory in him. There was no impatience to prove himself. He entered the marked grass with the grave purpose of a creature who had always understood that work was done one sound step at a time. Cressida settled her hands and listened through him. Not fast, she whispered. True. The first stretch seemed simple from a distance, a sweep of damp meadow between two rows of flags, but the rain had softened the ground where hooves had passed since morning. Philippa took it at speed, Maribel's stride long and bright. Applause rose when she cleared the first low hedge with dazzling neatness. Cressida let Old Bracken come on more slowly. She heard a lady behind the rope murmur, "At that pace, she'll finish by nightfall." A gentleman answered, "If she finishes at all." The words no longer cut as deeply. They were only weather now, and she had ridden through worse. At the first hedge, Old Bracken shortened for himself. Cressida gave him the reins he asked for, and he went over with a rustle of brush against his old legs, landing square, plain, and balanced. The bell rang. It carried farther than the applause had done. Ahead, the lower turn waited, glistening and narrow where the grass had been pressed into slick clay. Philippa came into it too sharply. Maribel's hind feet slid a little, not enough for danger, enough for warning. The mare recovered because she was generous and well-bred, but her tail flicked and her ears went back. Philippa did not slow. She wanted the watching faces to remember courage, not caution. Cressida took the turn nearly 20 feet wider, losing the clean line every spectator admired. Old Bracken placed each hoof where the ground held. The crowd stirred, ready to laugh, but the sound faltered when the next young lady on a glossy black hunter tried the nearer turn and had to draw up, breathless, before the second hedge. Her horse was not injured. Her pride suffered more loudly than her body. She withdrew with trembling dignity, and the first certainty of the morning left the field. After that, the circuit changed. The rain thickened. The water crossing, harmless in drawing-room conversation, took on the grey look of a thing that had heard too much confidence. One rider urged her mare forward twice, received 2 firm refusals, and raised her hand rather than shamed the horse further. Another cleared the water but landed roughly and chose to return by the side path, cheeks red, eyes bright with disappointment. No one mocked them. They had proper horses and proper names. Their caution became prudence at once. Cressida noticed and stored the knowledge without bitterness because bitterness used breath, and she needed hers. Old Bracken approached the water with ears moving, then settled. He chose a rougher place along the bank, not pretty, not fast, but honest. Cressida followed his choice. He crossed with a heavy lift and landed as if arriving at a familiar lane after market day. The bell chimed. The sound went out across the rain, and a silence followed it that no one had planned. Only 3 ladies remained upon the marked circuit when the ground began to climb toward the oak rise. Philippa led, still beautiful, still determined, but Maribel's stride had shortened. The mare was listening for help and receiving vanity. Behind her came Cressida and Old Bracken. A third rider on a grey held steady for another furlong, then felt her horse tire in the mud and wisely turned aside before the closing stretch. 2 women remained before the county, but only one horse looked as if he trusted the hands above him. Philippa looked back. It lasted less than a breath. Her eyes went from Cressida to the closing hedge and ditch beneath the oak, then to the shorter right approach. Cressida saw the look. Mr. Tallow, standing near the rise with rain on his hat, saw more than that. The closing hedge waited darker than the others, with a shallow ditch before it and trampled earth beyond. The safer line lay to the left, longer and rougher, where the bank rose unevenly but firm. The right was shorter, more elegant, and treacherous under the surface. Philippa chose the right. Maribel gathered because she was brave. Then, at the last instant, the mare felt the false ground and refused, planting herself before the hedge and swinging aside with a desperate wisdom her rider had not granted her. The crowd cried out. Philippa kept her seat, but the refusal carried her beyond the proper line. Mud splashed her hem. Maribel trembled, eyes wide, ashamed of nothing except being misunderstood. Again, Philippa snapped, low but not low enough. Mr. Tallow raised his hand. Lady Philippa, not from that side. She ignored him. She drew Maribel around too sharply, trying to reclaim the approach before Cressida reached it. For one dangerous moment, their paths could be made to seem confused. Cressida understood the trap as clearly as if Philippa had spoken it aloud. If Cressida pressed forward, she would be blamed for crowding. If she stopped, she would lose the last stretch and appear afraid. She chose the only answer that could live in daylight. She took Old Bracken wide, far wider than victory wanted, giving Philippa every visible inch of field. "She is yielding," someone called. "She is frightened," another answered. Cressida did not reply. Old Bracken's ears fixed on the left line. Rain ran down Cressida's cheek. She felt his back gather, slow and strong beneath her. Not a hunter's flash. Not a lady's showpiece. A working creature's whole honest body choosing one more task because the hands on the reins had never lied to him. "Now," she whispered. Old Bracken jumped. He cleared the hedge without grace and with absolute truth. His 4 feet met the far bank. For a heartbeat, the mud slid beneath him, and the watching world seemed to hang on the old strength in his legs. Then he found ground. 1 step. Another. Safe. Standing. The bell rang clear above the rain. Cressida rode past the closing marker alone. No one spoke. Even the horses seemed to hold still. The county had come to see an old plough horse fail, and instead the polished field had fallen away until only he remained beneath the woman they had laughed at. Then Ned shouted once from near the rail and clapped both hands over his mouth, horrified by his own joy. Mrs. Vale did not bother to hide her tears. A few hands began to applaud, uncertain, then stronger when no one forbade them. Sebastian stood at the edge of the grass, rain running dark through his hair, and bowed to Cressida before the county. Not a nod. Not a courtesy tossed to preserve appearances. A full, grave acknowledgement that made the applause falter into something more serious than admiration. Cressida's throat tightened, but she kept her seat until Mr. Tallow reached Old Bracken's bridle. "Sound, miss," he said, his voice rough. "By sense and good handling, sound." "By trust," Cressida said. Philippa rode up moments later, her face pale beneath fury and rain. "She crossed my approach," she said, loud enough for the nearest guests to hear. "She blocked Marybelle and forced the refusal." Cressida turned in the saddle. "I gave you more field than prudence deserved. You interfered. Your line was unsafe before I reached it." Lady Agatha arrived beneath an umbrella carried by a footman, her expression sharpened by public loss. "Your Grace, this result cannot stand. Miss Fell rode dangerously and confused my daughter's horse at the closing hedge. I demand that she be excluded from the result." Sebastian looked to Mr. Tallow. The stable master removed his hat despite the rain. "I saw Lady Philippa strike the marker near the oak rise with her crop before the circuit began, Your Grace. I thought it odd then. I think it less odd now." Philippa froze. Lady Agatha's eyes flashed. A servant's word, offered to protect his master's favourite. The word spread through the wet air like poison. Sebastian's face went cold. He looked at Lady Agatha, then at Philippa, then at Cressida sitting upright on the old horse whose bell still trembled with the last clear note. "Then we shall settle it where every witness can be heard and no weather can blur what was done," he said. "Everyone to the great drawing room. Now." The great drawing room of Halverton Abbey had never looked less like a room meant for music. Rain struck the tall windows in silver lines, and the portraits of dead Vane stared down through candlelight as if even ancestry had been summoned to witness what rank could conceal and what it could no longer silence. Guests entered in damp clusters, carrying the smell of wet wool, crushed grass, and unease. Cressida stood near Mrs. Vale with mud drying at the hem of her riding habit and the rein still remembered in her hands. Old Bracken had been left beneath the stable arch with Ned and Mr. Tallow's head groom, sound, fed, and watched as carefully as any duke's hunter. Yet Cressida felt his absence like a missing heartbeat. The bell's final note from the field still seemed to tremble in the room, though only memory carried it now. Lady Philippa stood beside her mother near the pianoforte, pale with anger beneath the delicate ruin of rain. Lady Agatha Merrow held her cane before her in both hands, the picture of injured dignity. Sebastian Vane crossed to the centre of the carpet. He did not take the place of a host. He took the place of a man closing the door on whispers. "No one will leave until this matter is heard plainly," he said. The murmur that followed was indignant only until it reached his face. Lady Agatha lifted her chin. "Your Grace, this is extraordinary. My daughter has been frightened, insulted, and now accused by servants eager to please the house that feeds them. Then it is fortunate, Sebastian replied, that servants are not the only witnesses. He turned to the steward. Bring them. The door opened. Matthew Rusk entered first, rain darkening his shoulders, followed by the Halverton groom who had fetched him, Mr. Tallow, Ned, and Philippa's maid, Mrs. Lark, whose black ribbon sat crooked on her cap. At the sight of the maid, Philippa's fingers tightened in her shawl. Cressida saw it. So did Sebastian. He began with the farrier. Mr. Rusk, speak only to what you know. Matthew bowed stiffly. Yes, your grace. My uncle Abel Rusk has kept no working accounts for 3 years. His hands will not allow it. I keep the forge books now. No pennyroyal, tansy, stable salts, or anything of that sort was sold to Miss Fell. Not 3 days ago. Not ever. Sebastian placed the forged ledger on the table. And this entry? Matthew's mouth tightened. False, your grace. The name is copied poorly. The hand tries to look like an old account hand, but it is not ours. Cressida watched Lady Agatha's eyes cool rather than widen. She had expected this blow. A provincial farrier may be mistaken, Lady Agatha said. Or persuaded. By whom? Sebastian asked. By sympathy, perhaps. Miss Fell has attracted much of it today. She has attracted evidence. He set beside the ledger the wrapped cut girth, the linen pouch of herbs, the lavender thread, and the bell strap with its wrong knot preserved under Mr. Tallow's handkerchief. The small objects looked almost foolish under so much candlelight. Then Cressida saw the guests lean toward them, and foolishness became a trail. Mr. Tallow stepped forward. The girth was cut with a blade. The watermarker was moved by hand. The pouch was found only after Miss Fell was already under suspicion. The bell strap from Old Bracken's bridle had been removed and tied back wrong, with herb dust pressed into the leather. Lavender silk was caught on a nail by the stall boards. Lady Philippa gave a brittle laugh. Lavender is hardly a crime. No, Cressida said. But it becomes interesting when it follows your maid. Mrs. Lark flinched. Lady Agatha turned toward her with a look so soft it was almost kind. Poor Lark. You must not let this frighten you into repeating stable gossip. Sebastian's voice cut through the room. Mrs. Lark, you were seen near Old Bracken's stall before dawn. The maid shook her head at once. No, your grace. I mean, I passed by. I lost a glove. I didn't touch anything. Ned stepped forward, then stopped as if the carpet itself were rank. Sebastian looked at him. Speak. Ned swallowed. She were crouched by the rear boards, your grace. Not near the aisle where a glove would fall. She had lavender cloth over her arm. Mrs. Lark's eyes filled. I didn't mean harm. Philippa's whisper cracked like ice. Lark, be quiet. Sebastian turned to the maid. Look at me, not at Lady Philippa. No servant under my roof will lose bread for truth. Lady Agatha gave a soft, wounded sound. Your grace, this is coercion. No. It is the removal of yours. The room went still. Mrs. Lark pressed both hands together so tightly that her knuckles whitened. My lady gave me the pouch, she whispered. Philippa's face emptied. That's not true. You told me to put it near the old horse's stall. Lady Agatha said no one would be hurt. She said Miss Fell was grasping for notice and must be made to withdraw before people started calling her brave. Liar, Philippa said, but the word had no strength. Mrs. Lark looked at her then, not as a maid looks at a mistress, but as a frightened woman looking at the person who had made fear useful. You said everyone already laughed at the bell. You said no one would believe a plough horse mattered. Cressida felt the words enter her more slowly than relief should have done. The room blurred for a breath, not with tears, but with the exhaustion of being proved innocent after so many people had preferred her guilt. Mrs. Vale's hand found her elbow, firm and warm. Sebastian did not look away from the Merrows. And the closing marker, he asked. Mr. Tallow answered. Lady Philippa struck it with her crop before the last circuit. I thought it odd. After Mary Bell's refusal, I thought it plain. Philippa's eyes flashed. I only touched it. It was already loose. Because it had been made so, Sebastian said. And you knew where? Lady Agatha's composure finally split. You would ruin my daughter over a horse, a maid, and a poor woman's wounded pride. No, Sebastian said. Your daughter did not fear a horse. She feared being seen less clearly than Miss Fell. You taught her that beauty and rank entitled her to admiration, and when a reduced gentlewoman earned respect instead, you tried to turn respect into scandal. Philippa looked at Cressida then with naked resentment, stripped of sweetness. He looked at you as if you mattered. The room heard it. That was worse for her than any confession. Cressida answered quietly. I did matter before he looked. The sentence seemed to pass through every woman in the room differently. Lady Agatha reached for Philippa's arm, but Sebastian spoke before she could retreat behind motherhood. Lady Philippa Merrow is excluded from the result of the Halverton charitable course. House Merrow will receive no further patronage from Halverton Abbey. Any repetition of these accusations against Miss Fell will be answered through my solicitor, and if necessary, before a magistrate. Mrs. Lark, Ned, and any servant who spoke today remain under my protection. Mr. Tallow will see to it. Lady Agatha's face went white with fury. You forget yourself, Your Grace. On the contrary. I remember myself too well. He turned then, not only to the Merrows but to the whole room. I did not cut the girth. I did not place herbs. I did not forge a ledger. But I did something easier to excuse and therefore more dangerous. I laughed first. No one moved. Even the rain seemed quieter against the windows. Sebastian faced Cressida fully, though his voice carried to every witness. I saw an old horse, a worn saddle, and a lady without the armor of wealth. I mistook plainness for inferiority. My words gave cruelty permission to dress itself as amusement. Old Bracken did not disgrace Halverton. Miss Fell did not disgrace this gathering. Arrogance did. Cressida had stood through insult, suspicion, and threat without lowering her head. This nearly broke her. Not because a duke praised her. Praise would have been easier. He had placed his pride on the same floor where her dignity had been dragged and asked the county to look at both. The steward cleared his throat. Your Grace, the result. Sebastian did not look away from Cressida. Miss Cressida Fell is declared first in the charitable course. The pledged purse and Halverton patronage will be delivered to Fellbrook House for tenant repairs under her direction. A few hands began to clap. Cressida lifted her hand, and the sound died before it could cover the truth with comfort. I accept the clearing of my name, she said. I accept the purse and patronage for Fellbrook's tenants. I do not accept applause as payment for what was permitted before proof became fashionable. Shame moved through the room more honestly than admiration had. Sebastian bowed his head. Nor should you. Lady Philippa turned away first. Lady Agatha followed, not defeated gracefully, but removed from the room by the silence of people who no longer wished to stand near her. When the door closed behind them, Sebastian came only as close as propriety allowed. Miss Fell, he said, when this day has ended, may I call at Fellbrook? Not as rescuer. Not as judge. As a man with much left to repair. Cressida looked at him, at the mud still drying on his boots, at the power he had used at last without taking her voice from her. Somewhere beyond the windows, faint beneath the rain, Old Bracken's bell rang once under the stable arch. You may call, Your Grace, she said. But I decide what can be repaired. I would expect nothing less, he replied. This time, the room made way for her not because she had been rescued, but because she had remained standing until truth caught up. 3 weeks after the rain at Halverton, Fellbrook House had not become beautiful. It had become braver. That was the word Cressida chose as she stood in the yard before breakfast with her ledger under one arm, watching 2 men replace slates along the north roof while a mason argued cheerfully with Mrs. Vale about whether the kitchen chimney needed repair before the west parlour ceiling. The parlour ceiling still showed a brown stain shaped like a map of an unhappy country, but the chimney served people who needed warmth, and so Mrs. Vale was winning. Beyond the ash lane, the Hargreaves' cottage had new thatch along one side, and the Bell sisters stood outside each morning as if every hammer blow were a performance arranged for their delight. The promised Halverton patronage had arrived through the steward with proper accounts, no flourish, and no suggestion that Cressida should be grateful beyond reason. The purse from the charitable course had paid the most urgent arrears. Mr. Cale, the mortgage agent, had written again in a tone so newly respectful that Mrs. Vale had read the letter twice for pleasure and once for suspicion. Still, Fellbrook was not saved by miracle. The roof remained unfinished. The ledgers remained stern. The tenants still needed decisions made before comfort could be considered. That suited Cressida. A life restored by work could be trusted more than one rescued by display. Old Bracken stood in the lower paddock, his coat brushed to a rough shine, his brass bell ringing whenever he lowered his head to investigate the clover that grew near the fence. He had survived sudden fame with admirable indifference. 3 notes had arrived asking after his health. One gentleman had offered to buy him at a price so absurd that Cressida had laughed aloud, then used the letter to light the kitchen fire. Old Bracken, when told of his value, had sneezed into her sleeve. The sound of carriage wheels came along the drive before the sun had fully lifted above the eastern trees. Cressida looked up. A dark carriage stopped at the proper distance from the front steps, not too near, not sweeping in as though gravel itself belonged to it. Sebastian Vane descended with his hat in one hand and a calling card in the other. He had called twice before, always at the correct hour, always with Mrs. Vale present, always careful to behave as if Fellbrook's cracked threshold deserved the same respect as Halverton Abbey's marble. Today he paused and looked not at what was missing, but at what had been chosen. The cottages first. The roof before the parlour. The stable before the drawing-room. When his gaze reached Cressida, there was no pity in it. That alone made breathing easier. Mrs. Vale appeared at the front door before he could knock, accepting the card with the grave satisfaction of a woman who had once doubted every duke on principle and still found the habit useful. His Grace may walk with Miss Fell in the stable yard, she announced, while I sit at the open window and observe enough to satisfy propriety. Sebastian bowed. Mrs. Vale, I would not dare disappoint propriety when it has such a vigilant ally. Nor curiosity, Mrs. Vale said. I include that in the office. Cressida looked down before her smile betrayed her. Sebastian joined her near the paddock fence, where old Bracken lifted his head, considered him, and returned to the clover. I see I remain only moderately improved in his opinion, Sebastian said. Moderately is generous. He used to dislike you. Then I shall treasure progress. The bell chimed as if old Bracken objected to sentimental exaggeration. For a moment, the 3 of them stood with the damp morning air around them and Fellbrook waking behind them, not whole, not secure forever, but no longer waiting in silence for ruin. Sebastian looked toward the roof. My steward tells me you returned the additional funds for the west parlour. I did. He also tells me the note accompanying the return was very firm. It was polite. He said firm. Then he reads accurately. Sebastian's mouth softened. I deserved that. You did. The cottages needed repair first. I know that now. Did you know it when you sent the money? He considered the answer instead of reaching for the elegant one. No. I wanted to help, and I disliked that help was not mine to define. Cressida rested one gloved hand on the fence. That sounds dangerously honest. I have been advised that honesty, though inconvenient, improves with practice. By whom? A severe instructor. She must be exhausting. She is the most instructive woman I know. The warmth in his voice unsettled her more than flattery would have, because it did not ask her to become softer for him. It asked only to be believed if she chose. Cressida turned toward old Bracken, who had ambled closer and now watched them with the solemn disapproval of a chaperone unpaid for his labor. Why did you come today, Your Grace? Sebastian's expression grew serious. Tomorrow Halverton holds the Reformed Charitable Gathering. No marked circuit. No ladies asked to prove worth for spectators. Tenant relief, stable subscriptions, and a fund for retired working horses. I came to ask whether the bell may be brought. Her hand stilled on the rail. The bell? With your permission. A place has been made for it above the stable arch. Not as a curiosity. Not as a trophy. As an apology given a useful shape. Cressida looked at him carefully. You do not need my bell to prove you have changed. "No," he said. "I need your leave to honor what I once mocked." The answer hurt in a strange way, not because it wounded her, but because it entered a place still tender from healing. She looked away toward the ash lane, where the repaired cottage roof caught the pale light. "Do you admire the woman who won, or do you merely regret wronging her?" Sebastian did not answer at once. The pause was long enough for Old Bracken to nose at Cressida's sleeve and for Mrs. Vale's silhouette to shift behind the window. At last he said, "I regret wronging you. I shall regret it because regret reminds a comfortable man how easily comfort becomes arrogance. But admiration came before the winning. It came when you saw danger where I saw inconvenience. It came when you trusted an old horse while the rest of us trusted appearances. It came when you defended Ned's truth though your own name was under attack. It came when you refused to save your house by injuring your honor. I do not admire your victory because it made you worthy. I admire it because it forced us to see what was already there." Cressida looked down at the rail. The wood was rough beneath her glove. "That is a very difficult answer to dislike." "I hope so. Do not become too confident." "I wouldn't dare." "You would. But perhaps less often." His eyes warmed, but he did not step closer. That restraint, more than the words, persuaded her. He had learned where not to stand. "Miss Fell," he said, "I would like permission to court you formally. With marriage as my honest intention, if someday you find me worthy of the question. I will not ask you to leave Fellbrook before you choose. I will not press need into affection. I will not call command protection. I will stand where you allow me and repair what I can, beginning with myself." Cressida felt the morning open around her, wide and frightening and filled with the quiet work of men on the roof, children laughing near the lane, and an old horse breathing against the fence. She thought of the yard where laughter had begun. She thought of the drawing room where he had named his own arrogance before those who had borrowed it. She thought of the bell, not restored to youth, but given honor without being changed. "You may court me," she said. His breath altered. "Properly?" "Properly." "Slowly?" "Very slowly. And if I forget and begin giving orders disguised as concern, I will correct you." "Severely?" "Naturally." He bowed his head. "Then I accept the terms." The next afternoon, Halverton Abbey stable yard filled again, but it did not sound as it had before. The guests came quieter. Some came from conscience, some from curiosity, and some because society could not resist standing near a thing it had recently misjudged. House Merrow was absent, and the absence carried more consequence than apology would have done. Ned stood beside Mr. Tallow in a new waistcoat, safe in his place and still astonished by it. Mrs. Vale occupied a chair of prominence and pretended not to enjoy the view. Above the stable arch hung the old brass plough bell, polished but not altered, suspended from a dark oak beam with a small inscription beneath it honoring working horses and the labor that held estates together. Old Bracken stood below it, broad, plain, brushed, and entirely himself. Sebastian spoke briefly of obligation, not benevolence, and of the danger of mistaking Polish for worth. Then he stepped back. Cressida took the rope and rang the bell. Its clear note rose over the yard where laughter had once begun, over servants and tenants, over ladies who had learned silence too late, over the Duke who stood beside her and not before her. Old Bracken lowered his head between them as if all ceremonies were interruptions before supper. Cressida smiled without fear. The bell rang once more in the wind, no longer a joke, no longer a wound, but a small bright truth given a place of honor at last.